The kettle's whistle sliced through the kitchen like an ambulance siren, but I didn't move. The phone buzzed on the table with its usual insistence. Darius, calling. I let it ring. Steam rose, fogging the window, and through the blurred glass, I watched the street outside go on in peace. As if the world didn't know that inside this house, a mother was learning to say no for the first time in 72 years. 3 hours earlier, a random notification had lit up my phone. New memories and family moments. I opened it without thinking. The first video started with laughter, loud music, and a toast of clinking glasses. Monique, flawless in a salmon-colored dress, her skin glowing under the sea's sunlight. Darius, sun-kissed, wearing a light linen shirt, hugging Kyla and Devon against a turquoise horizon. Behind them, the ship's bright signboard. The caption read only 2 words: family vacation, family, and I wasn't there. My heart pounded like a door slammed by the wind. Just last week, my son had called, "Mom, we've got to be responsible. The trip, it's canceled. Money's tight. We'll stay here." I believed him, made coffee for one, turned off the TV to save electricity, like a soldier helping in a storm. Now, that video stared back at me with the boldness of someone who's never had to hide anything. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just stood there with the phone in my hand, a cold clarity running through me. The silence of the house felt like testimony. The clock ticked as if counting my years of obedience. Beside the basil pot, the bank envelope waited on the table. I had picked it up earlier, out of intuition, like someone retrieving a key before nightfall. The phone buzzed again. Message from Darius. "Mom, I urgently need $6,000. My card got blocked. I'll pay you back next month." I read it slowly, syllable by syllable, a sentence in every sense. No. How are you? No. I'm sorry. Just the same old password trying to open the same locked door. Me. My fingers trembled, but not from fear. They trembled like the hand of someone straightening a crooked picture frame. I typed 4 words born from an old prayer, matured in the salt of my throat. Ask Monique's family first. Send. The phone began to ring like an alarm gone off. I let it. I turned off the kettle, poured water over the tea bag, and the scent of mint rose. Clean, decisive. Resting both hands on the table, I breathed deep and whispered, not to him, but to myself. My dignity is not negotiable. The phrase settled in my chest with the perfect weight, and for the first time, it didn't hurt. I opened the window. The morning air came in like simple gospel, bread, wind, life. I closed my eyes and spoke softly, the way my mother taught me when things got heavy. "Lord, if I still have worth, show me how to endure." The answer didn't come in thunder. It came in detail. The quiet kettle, the house in order, the empty chair across from me, waiting for me. I realized I'd spent years waiting for company to sit, laughter to cook for, reasons to exist. And while I waited, someone learned to live off my labor. I mistook love for endless charity. They called it family. I called it duty. Heaven called it a warning, and I didn't listen. My phone lit up again. Monique, long texts written like press releases. "Alma, I don't understand your reply. The kids are confused. Let's talk like adults." No apology, no truth, just the same old habit of pulling me back to the leash of guilt. I pressed the X and closed the chat. Didn't delete, didn't answer, just closed. The whole house seemed to listen. The hum of the fridge, the drip from the faucet, the upstairs neighbor dragging a chair, all part of a background choir saying the same word, enough. I took the bank envelope. The thick paper brushed my fingers with an authority no preacher ever had over me. Inside, forms to close the joint account and cancel authorizations. I'd been at the bank the day before, just to ask some questions. Today, I had a decision. I walked down the hallway. My parents' wedding photo still watched over the door like a blessing. My mother used to say, "Daughter, when love asks for everything and gives nothing back, pray. Prayer doesn't change the wolf, it gives you back your skin." I looked at my reflection in the narrow hallway mirror, hair streaked with silver, eyes tired but lit. I saw myself, so simple it hurt. Back at the table, I pulled out a chair and wrote on the back of the envelope with the blue pen I always use to pay bills. Proof is respect for the future. Underneath, I noted dates, amounts, promises, not to throw in anyone's face, to remind myself. Every time kindness is mistaken for an open door, forgetfulness becomes the accomplice. The phone rang once more. I let it ring until it stopped. Took a sip of lukewarm tea and spoke to whoever might be listening on the other side of my courage. Have you ever loved someone who tried to erase you? If you know the taste of that silence, write "I resist" in the comments. Not to comfort me, to promise yourself. Sometimes we need to see our own word written to believe we exist. I drew the curtains halfway, letting the light slip in from the side. The kitchen looked like a new morning. My heart didn't. It was still a battlefield, and I knew confrontation was coming. They'd arrive with explanations, figures, excuses. That's just how family is. And I knew my old temptation too, that cowardly urge to undo my no with half a dozen holy justifications. But today, I had something I didn't have yesterday, a boundary. I grabbed my purse, slid the envelope inside, and before leaving, touched the table like someone sealing a pact. The wood was cold, my hands steady. I crossed the living room, and the creaking door of the apartment whispered "Amen" as I turned the key. In the hallway, the world had the ordinary noise of places, unaware that a woman had just been born again. I pressed the elevator button, and in the reflection of the glass door, my shadow looked taller than it had yesterday. The elevator arrived. I stepped in, ground floor. As it descended, a certainty visited me. It smelled like rain about to fall. This story doesn't end at the bank. It begins where the house decides to speak. I thought I'd seen it all until I opened the oldest box in the hallway closet. Have you ever trusted someone who wanted you silent? If this story spoke to you, write "I resist" in the comments. I'll read every word. The smell of cornbread still lives in the hallway of my building, even on days when nobody's baking. It's an old memory, melting butter, slow brewed coffee, my mother humming hymns softly as she stirred a pot of grits. When the elevator doors opened, that smell took me by the hand and carried me back, before Darius, before the bills, before the weariness. I remembered the dirt yard where I learned that a full table isn't about food, it's about belonging. When I was a child, we didn't have much, but we had rules. The first spoonful always went to whoever came home tired. I grew up believing that love meant serving first and sitting last. My mother used to say, "Alma, when the table is yours, God passes by." I carried that sentence through life like a medal in my pocket. Years later, I became the woman who cooked to heal. On Sundays, even when I was alone, I made mac and cheese as if I were expecting company. The oven opened. The smell of cheese and nutmeg filled the air, and the house overflowed with good memories. When Darius was born, I swore my son would never know the taste of fear. I worked double shifts at the nursing home, washed more sheets than my back could bear, saved coins in glass jars labeled with masking tape. Darius, school shoes, Darius, field trip, Darius, graduation. In every photo of him as a child, there's one hidden detail, my hands in the background holding something. A coat, a lunch, a paid bill. I never minded being blurred as long as he appeared whole. It was on one of those Sundays, years ago, that life trained me for what I didn't yet know was coming. Darius, now grown, came home with a big appetite and tired eyes. I served chicken stew with okra, parboiled rice, and a simple lemon cake. He ate in silence at first, like a child, and then talked endlessly, like a man. Courses, projects, doors that wouldn't open. One almost worked out after another. And I, with my mother's schooling, replied the only way I knew how. Stay as long as you need. The house is yours. The house became a bridge, and I became the toll gate to myself. Years piled up like dishes in the rack. Then came Monique, beautiful, sharp, always saying we when she meant I. Then Kyla and Devin, my brown sugar loves, and I added cinnamon to their porridge because grandchildren deserve the flavor of an embrace. Every big decision they made had my coffee before it, my cooking after, and my I'll help in the middle. When their apartment lost power, I kept mine lit and the door open. When the car broke down, I sold my wedding jewelry, pieces I hadn't worn since grief changed its address. When they said, "We'll pay you back one day," I answered, "No need," but I needed. I just never learned how to say it. I remember the day I ran downstairs with a still warm cake because Kyla was turning 7 and the baker had mixed up the date. I sang off-key in the building's hallway, frosting dripping down my wrist, and felt so happy at her laughter that I forgot my knee ached. In the elevator, Monique hugged me sideways and whispered, "You're an angel, Alma." I went back home with a chest full, like someone who'd been paid a salary that never goes through the bank. That's the danger of the wrong kind of compliment. It pays you in applause, and soon you start working for claps. At the nursing home, the ladies called me Pastor of the Stove. I'd laugh. I only knew how to pray and cook. But some prayers I kept just for myself, flavored with ginger to soothe the throat. Lord, keep my heart soft. He did. So soft, it became a road for heavy trucks. If you're listening and you've also given everything to someone who didn't value it, I understand you. I know the recipe for making soup out of scraps, light out of one candle, and peace out of a song sung too many times. I know a mother's math, adding silence, dividing guilt, subtracting from herself to multiply in others. We call it love. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's fear of losing the little family we were given. Monique introduced me to the glamour of picture-perfect dinners. "We need experiences, Alma," she'd say, seasoning her sentences with Himalayan pink salt. I'd smile quietly. My favorite experience had always been the smell of beans done right. But I learned to smile for pictures, to raise glasses, to fit into their shiny world. When they asked for my card pin, just so the rent won't be late, I gave it, like handing over my wooden spoon. They began stirring a pot that wasn't theirs. I thought it was temporary, that one of Darius's big projects would finally turn the corner. Every mom, just this once, I seasoned with peppered faith to handle the burn. Each bill paid felt like a hug I gave myself. I didn't see it was a one-way handout, because when love becomes a shortcut for those who don't want a journey, your road gets shorter. The night before the cruise video, I baked molasses cookies just to perfume the house. I thought, maybe tomorrow they'll stop by. Put them in my mother's old tin, the one with the faded flower on the lid, and left it on the table. In the morning, the tin was untouched, and my phone showed the open sea where they were without me. The molasses, once sweet, turned to iron on my tongue. I could have smashed the tin, thrown it all away, but instead I sat down and ate one cookie slowly. It tasted of cloves, of childhood, of my mother's voice saying, "Daughter, add more cinnamon when life turns cold." As I chewed, I understood. I'd learned to cook for everyone but the woman staring back at me from the oven door. I had to learn to live for myself. And that has a strange taste at first, like medicine that heals. That's when I opened the hallway closet to grab a napkin and noticed a box tucked behind the linens, its lid warped, the paper yellowed around the edges, the faint smell of old talcum powder. I set the cookie tin down, pulled the box out carefully. Inside were receipts, letters, notes, promises written in blue ink, and a signature that wasn't mine. I thought the first betrayal had been the trip. It wasn't. It had already been living inside my house, and it was written on paper. The box had the exact weight of a memory that doesn't want to be opened. I carried it to the table and blew off the dust, like waking a sleeping past. The first paper I saw was a bank contract, a joint line of credit, signature, Alma Whitaker, shaky, signature just below, Darius L. Whitaker, steady, confident, and identical to mine, too identical. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake. But the more I turned the pages, the more that mistake grew teeth. Dates, account numbers, witnesses. There it was, the car title in my name, the apartment mortgage attached, an investment form, all in forged handwriting. A son using his mother's name as a shield. I leaned back in the chair. My whole body wanted to tremble. But I didn't. The heart only whispered, in a tone only God could hear. Family doesn't put a pen in the hand of the one they love. The kitchen walls seemed to shrink. I felt the same sickness I'd felt holding my mother's body in the hospital, torn between staying and letting go. I lifted the contract toward the window. Sunlight filtered through the thin paper, revealing the difference in strokes like scars in ink. There it was. Proof, not of malice, but of my omission. I was the one who taught Darius that all he had to do was ask, and he learned to ask without limit. The wall clock struck 11:30. A car horn echoed from the street, the world carrying on, indifferent. I sat and opened the notepad that had been inside the box. Restaurant bills, hotel receipts, airline tickets, and a handwritten spreadsheet, vacation fund, withdrawals covered. Every withdrawal was a memory I never lived. My heart felt like a ransacked safe. I took a deep breath and heard a faint noise inside the wall. Maybe the heater pipes, but it sounded like a warning. God speaks when the world goes quiet. I closed my eyes and asked for courage. Not courage to confront my son, but courage not to become the bitter woman my faith had always kept me from becoming. I picked up my phone, opened Darius's contact, and stared at our message history, promises, apologies, heart emojis, a recorded prayer from last Christmas. How many times had I mistaken strategy for repentance? How many times had I believed God wanted me to be patient, when what he really asked for was discernment? The sounds of the street returned, laughter, children playing. I looked up at the ceiling, searching for an answer. That's when the light flickered, and with it came a memory. An old conversation, Monique whispering in the hallway. You know this apartment will be ours one day, right? Darius always takes such good care of you. At the time, it sounded like affection. Today, it sounded like a rehearsed confession. I stood, went to my room and opened the drawer where I kept my personal papers. The life insurance envelope was untouched, but the one labeled bank authorization had a new staple. Inside, another copy of the same contract. I didn't remember signing it. The handwriting was close, but the R in Whitaker rose too high. And I always make my R's round, like a flower. He wrote his like a blade. The knot in my chest was a blend of anger and mourning. Anger for what they'd done. Mourning for the mother I would no longer be. I sat on the edge of the bed, remembered when Darius was little and drew crooked hearts for me on Mother's Day. Once he asked, Mom, when we lie, does God still hear our prayers? And I answered, He does, son. But he stays silent until we tell the truth. In that moment, I realized God's silence had been his answer all along. I was just late to hear it. I picked up my phone and took a photo of the contract. Saved the files in a folder titled, Faith is Also Strategy. Not out of anger, out of purpose. Because proof is respect for the future. And God hadn't asked me for revenge. He'd asked for wisdom. As I closed the box, I heard soft knocking at the door. I opened it. There stood Ms. Loretta James, my downstairs neighbor, floral scarf, eyes of someone who's seen the world break and mend again. Alma, Are you all right? I felt a tug in my chest and thought I should come up. I smiled, tears warming my eyes. Things are finally starting to get better, Loretta. She stepped in gently, glanced at the table covered in papers, and understood without me saying a word. She sat down, took my hand, and whispered, "Child, God doesn't sleep. He just waits for us to wake up." We sat there in silence for a while. From the old radio in the living room, a Mahalia Jackson song began softly. "Take my hand, precious Lord." I closed my eyes. God, in His gentleness, had sent help disguised as a neighbor. When Loretta left, I kept the door open for a few minutes. A light breeze slipped in, gentle, like a blessing. I looked at the table and whispered to myself, "Lord, show me how to endure without hardening." And in the corner, the box seemed to shimmer in the late afternoon light, not like a burden, but like a map. I took my coat. Tomorrow I would go to the bank, not for revenge, for organized faith. Because faith, when it matures, learns to sign its own papers. And that night, the house began to speak, and it wasn't just memory. It was a warning. That night, the wind felt different. It slipped through the cracks of the window as if it carried messages. I've always believed that houses keep the soul of those who pray within them, and mine, after so many years of swallowed silence, finally seemed ready to speak. The kettle hissed softly on the stove, the sound like a secret trying to be told. I reached for a cup, but before pouring the tea, I noticed the wall clock had stopped at 9:13, the exact time, days earlier, when I'd received the cruise video. Coincidence? Or was God showing me the precise moment when everything began to change? I turned off the kitchen lights and stood there, lit only by the amber glow from the street. The house was breathing. Each creak of the wood sounded like an answer to thoughts I hadn't spoken aloud. A picture tilted slightly on the wall, the family portrait from a distant Christmas. I walked over and straightened it. Behind the glass, my old self was still smiling, unaware of the price of that smile. I went back to the table and opened the box again. Among the papers was an old postcard, Birmingham, 2004, in my late husband's handwriting. On the back, he had written, "Take care of what's yours, Alma. The rest, God will fix." I ran my fingers over the faded ink, feeling as if time itself had been waiting for this exact moment to whisper those words. A sharp thud echoed in the hallway, the closet door slamming on its own. It wasn't the wind. The windows were closed. A shiver ran through me, but not from fear. It was the same kind of shiver I'd felt the night my mother passed away, when her old radio turned on by itself, playing a hymn she loved. God speaks in the language we understand, and that night, He spoke in creaks and memories. I walked down the hallway. The cold floor beneath my feet seemed to guide me, as if it already knew the way. I opened the closet, the same one where I'd found the box, and saw something I hadn't noticed before. A thin white envelope, fallen behind the linens. Inside was a scanned copy of another document, stamped recently by the bank. Subject, property transfer. Beneficiary, Darius L. Whitaker. And there it was again, my forged signature. My heart raced, but my mind stayed calm, clear. The Holy Spirit doesn't always stop the blow. Sometimes He simply reveals the moment to act. I sat on the bed, looked around, and realized that everything surrounding me, the furniture, the curtains, the worn-out lamp, seemed to be saying, "Enough of sleeping in the middle of your own shipwreck." I picked up my brown prayer journal and wrote, "Lord, wake me before the fall." That's when I heard 3 firm knocks on the wall. I froze, knocked back, almost without thinking, and the sound answered, hollow. Behind that wall was a space that wasn't on the apartment's floor plan. Using my phone's flashlight, I tapped along the wall. In one spot, the tone changed, lighter, as if something were hidden inside. I moved the sideboard, pushed a loose panel, and found a small hollow, about the size of a shoebox. Inside was a plastic blue folder, covered in dust and brittle old tape. My name was handwritten on the cover, Alma W. I opened it. Inside were newspaper clippings, loan receipts, and a letter, signed by Ellen Parker, the bank's former manager, now retired. Dear Mrs. Whitaker, I know Mr. Darius has been using your account for transactions that don't match what you believe. I tried to warn you in 2019, but your son insisted you were ill and under guardianship. I kept copies because it didn't feel right to stay silent. If you're reading this, it means my conscience refused to die quiet. Ellen. The paper trembled between my fingers. It wasn't anger. It was confirmation. God was putting the pieces together, using the house as his messenger. I leaned my back against the wall and took a deep breath. The tears came hot, not from pain, but from relief. Because when truth arrives, it hurts, but it also cleanses. I looked up at the ceiling and said out loud, my throat raw from years of silence, Lord, if I still have worth, show me what to do with this. A soft breeze slipped through the half-open window, swaying the curtain as if someone had just left the room. And deep in my heart, I heard a simple, calm, unmistakable phrase. Don't rush, record. The voice wasn't external. It was that peace that comes when faith matures and recognizes its own strength. I picked up my phone, took photos of every document, and emailed them to myself. Then I closed the folder, ran my hand over the name Alma W., and felt that, finally, I was honoring what my name meant. As I turned off the lights, something shifted in the air. The house, once cold and silent, now seemed to be watching over me. It wasn't loneliness, it was presence. God dwells where truth decides to return. Before bed, I left a note on the table. Faith is a shield, but it's also strategy. I closed my eyes in peace, even knowing the storm was still on its way. And I slept with the certainty that this time, I was awake. The following dawn, the phone rang, and I knew the conspiracy was in motion. If you've ever felt that God warned you in silence, write "I heard it" in the comments. Sometimes the whisper is heaven's loudest shout. The early morning smelled of iron and rain, that kind of air that carries a warning. The phone rang at 2:17 a.m., the sound slicing through the silence of the house like glass shattering. On the screen, the name I expected and feared, Darius. I answered, "Mom, something happened." His voice trembled, not from what he said, but from fear of being caught. In the background, car noise, quick breathing, and a woman whispering. I knew the voice, Monique. They froze the account. "Mom, the new manager won't release it. You need to authorize it, now." I stayed quiet. The microwave clock blinked blue. 2:18. The wind whistled against the window, and inside me, something said, "Don't sign, don't speak, just listen." "Mom, you there? I'm serious. They're going to take the apartment." I took a sip of last night's cold tea and answered with a voice I didn't know I had. "The apartment's already been taken, Darius, just not by them." Silence. I heard Monique whisper something. Then the call ended. I stood there, phone still in my hand, feeling my entire body awaken. The old fear, the one that used to make me surrender, never came. In its place was a steady calm, like the sky holding its breath before a storm. I grabbed the blue folder, reopened Ellen Parker's letter, and understood. This was the moment. My dignity is not negotiable. I forwarded the photos to the email of the lawyer Loretta had recommended. Subject: unauthorized use of bank account. Evidence attached. Send. Each click felt like a prayer. Each message sent broke another chain. I sat in the armchair and looked out the window. The rain began, heavy, honest. Outside, the city slept, but my soul was wide awake. Around 3 o'clock, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Soft, deliberate, someone trying not to make noise. The doorbell didn't ring, just the metallic sound of a key turning slowly, the spare key I had given Darius months ago. My heart raced, but my mind stayed calm. I picked up the phone, turned on the speaker, and dialed a number. Loretta, she answered, half asleep. Alma? Everything okay? Stay on the line with me. The door opened. Darius walked in, his face half hidden under a hood. Monique right behind him, her eyes hard as polished steel. Mom, good. You're awake. We need to talk. I took a deep breath and replied, talk or convince? He sighed, lowering his tone. You don't understand, Mom. It was to help you, to protect what's ours. Ours? I repeated. The word came out like a verdict. Since when did my name become plural? Monique tried to step closer, but Loretta's voice came through the speaker loud enough for them to hear. I can hear everything. Alma. They froze. The shock in their eyes was living proof that the game had changed. Darius dropped his gaze. Are you recording this? I smiled softly. No, son. God is. The silence that followed was heavy. Outside, the rain thickened, hammering the windows. Monique tried to regain control. She's confused, Darius. It's her age. Before she could finish, I raised my hand. I may be old, but I'm not blind. And I've finally learned to read what isn't written. Her face went pale. Darius tried to justify himself, but every word stumbled over its own shame. Then a distant siren cut through the conversation. Or maybe it was just the wind, sounding like a trumpet. Either way, it was enough. They stepped back. We'll go, Mom. Go with God, I said, but don't take what belongs to Him. They left. The door closed gently, not in anger, but like someone ending a chapter. I sat back down, my body tired, but my spirit whole. I prayed a short prayer. Lord, don't let me hate, let me see the purpose. Minutes later, Loretta came upstairs. She found me still holding my cup of tea. Alma, what just happened? Deliverance, Loretta, disguised as confrontation. She smiled and laid her hand over mine. So the war's over? I shook my head. No, my friend. Now the rebuilding begins. The rain slowly eased. The clock, miraculously, started ticking again. I looked at it showing 3:33 and smiled. 3, the number of the Trinity, God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. The only ones who never betrayed me. In that moment, I understood. Sometimes heaven allows theft to teach value, abandonment to teach presence, loss to teach ownership of oneself. I stood, closed the window, and said aloud, firm and clear, my dignity is not negotiable. The echo of my voice filled the room as if the house itself whispered, Amen. And for the first time, I felt proud of the woman who stayed. The next morning, sunlight came through the window, and with it, the help I never expected. Morning arrived gently, smelling of wet earth and fresh coffee. I opened the windows, and for the first time in a long while, the light didn't sting my eyes. From the hallway came the sound of steps, familiar, slow, followed by the soft tap of fingernails on the wooden rail. It was Loretta, carrying her blue-covered Bible and a plate draped with a crochet cloth. Brought cornbread and courage, she said, stepping in. I smiled. Leave the courage on the table, the bread in the oven. She laughed, the kind of laugh that sounds like prayer. She sat at the table, glanced around the house, and said, It feels different here, lighter. I answered, Truth airs out what lies once suffocated. As the smell of bread filled the room, I told her everything. The calls, the forged contract, the midnight visit. Loretta listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was silent for a while, then said, You know Joseph was betrayed by his own family, don't you? They sold him as a slave, but that's how God placed him in the palace. It happens again and again, child. Sometimes betrayal is just the road that leads to providence. We sat in quiet for a while. The kettle whistled, and the steam rose like incense. As I poured the tea, Loretta reached into her purse and pulled out a card. My niece is an attorney, specializes in financial fraud and elder protection. I'm putting you in touch with her. But first, she looked at me firmly. You need to stop doing this alone. Faith is strategy too. I wrote down the name, Simone James, Esq. The simple thought of someone helping me carried a sweet, heavy kind of relief. Loretta went on. And one more thing, don't hide your evidence anymore. Take everything to her. The devil works in the dark, but God's justice loves the light. While we talked, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Mrs. Whitaker, this is Simone James. Aunt Loretta explained your situation. May I stop by around 11? I replied. Doors open, coffee's on. 2 hours later, Simone arrived. A young woman, steady eyes, calm voice. She wore round glasses and carried a worn leather case. Mrs. Whitaker, Aunt Loretta told me a little, but I'd like to hear it from you. I told her everything again, and she took notes, sometimes glancing up only to confirm dates. When I mentioned the retired manager's letter, she almost smiled. That's gold, ma'am. It's the missing piece that connects everything. And what do I do now? I asked. Breathe and keep every document safe. Don't confront anyone. Let justice move in its own time. The most important thing is that you don't lose your peace. As she spoke, something inside me realigned. For the first time, I saw faith and strategy sitting at the same table, drinking tea together. The same God who once told me to pray was now telling me to take notes. Simone gathered the evidence, made copies, and handed me a paper. Sign here. It authorizes us to act legally, but please understand, what's about to happen isn't revenge. It's restoration. I signed slowly, feeling each letter like a release. She tucked the papers back in her case and looked at me with professional tenderness. Mrs. Whitaker, you have no idea how many women go through this and never speak up. Your story will help others. After she left, I sat at the table watching the sunlight drift in. My phone buzzed again, a church group notification. The pastor had written, "Pray for families in crisis." I smiled and typed, "Pray for discernment." Sometimes the miracle isn't the bread that falls from heaven. It's the bread we learn not to hand to the wrong hands anymore. Later that day, Loretta came back for her dish. "So," she asked. "God sent me a lawyer," I said, laughing. "Then he's definitely on the case," she replied, winking. I was alone again, but this time, the silence wasn't punishment. It was fertile ground. I opened the window, felt the warmth of the sun on my face, and murmured, "Lord, thank you, because pain taught me to plan." I took my prayer journal and wrote, "Faith is a shield, but it's also strategy." And beneath it, a new sentence wrote itself, "Never alone." Then I thought of the women who would one day hear this story. Maybe one of them was you, on the other side of the screen, thinking it's over. But it's not over, child. Sometimes God takes back what was stolen and returns it in the shape of courage. Share this video with a strong woman who's forgotten her worth. Courage is contagious, and faith is strategy too. Days later, I got the call that changed everything. The hour of truth had come. The clock read 10:02 when the phone rang. It was the lawyer. "Mrs. Whitaker, we need you at the bank today. The manager and the legal department are already informed. It's time." My heart sped up, but not from fear. It felt like the moments before a church service, that mix of reverence and strength. I put on my blue-gray dress, the same one I wore to my husband's funeral. That day, I'd cried for an ending. Today, I wore it to celebrate a beginning. Before leaving, I put on wine-colored lipstick, the shade Loretta always calls the red of dignity. I looked at my reflection and whispered softly, "My dignity is not negotiable." I walked down the stairs with steady steps. Outside, the sky was clear, but the wind blew like a messenger of revelation. Loretta was waiting in the car. Ready, child. Ready and protected. At the bank, everything looked the same, but I was no longer the same woman. Simone greeted us with a calm smile and a folder in her hands. Around the conference table sat 3 people, the new manager, a bank attorney, and across from them, Darius, pale, restless, trying hard to look composed. Monique wasn't there. Shame, maybe, or strategy. "Mrs. Whitaker," the manager began, "we've reviewed the documents. There are multiple forged signatures. The bank accepts partial responsibility, but you'll need to decide whether to press criminal charges." I looked at Darius. He avoided my eyes, fidgeting with his hands. Simone met my gaze and nodded. "It's your choice, Alma. No one will rush you." I closed my eyes for a moment. I asked the Holy Spirit to translate what my heart wanted to say. When I opened them, my voice came out steady. "I don't want prison. I want respect. And I want my name clean." Silence. Even the air seemed to pause. Darius looked up for the first time. His eyes were wet, but no tears fell. "Mom, forgive me. I lost myself trying to prove I could give you everything you always gave me." "No, son," I said softly. "You lost yourself trying to own what was never yours. My peace." Simone handed me an envelope. "Sign here. This restores ownership of your apartment and blocks any future joint transactions." He also agrees, under legal penalty, never to use your identity again. I took the pen. My hands were steady. I signed each page as though sealing a covenant with my future. As the ink dried, I felt my whole body vibrate. It wasn't vengeance. It was justice with a name and address. Darius cried in silence. I didn't hug him, but I didn't turn away either. Sometimes forgiveness begins the moment you stop responding with pain. When we left, the sun was warmer. Loretta took my arm and said, "See, child, God didn't fail. He just waited for harvest time." On the sidewalk, the wind carried the smell of fresh bread from the bakery on the corner. I felt like laughing and crying at once. How many times had I begged God for a sign that everything would be all right? And there it was, the smell of home, of warm food, of ordinary life returning to me. Back at the apartment, I sat in the armchair and looked around. The house seemed to breathe with me. I took my journal from the drawer and wrote, "Proof is respect for the future." And below it, "But forgiveness is respect for the past." When I finished, I snapped a picture of the page and sent it to Simone. "Thank you," I wrote. She replied within minutes. "You've just become an example. Other women will follow your lead." I smiled, closed the journal, looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "Lord, if I still have worth, show me how to use what I've learned." And it was as if the Spirit replied, quietly, "Teach others." I picked up the phone and recorded a message for Loretta. "Neighbor, I think it's time we start something. A group. Women of faith and dignity. Not to complain about life, but to remind one another that love is not the same as servitude." She replied within seconds, "Already got the name, Never Alone." I closed my eyes and let the sound of the radio fill the room. Mahalia Jackson, once again. "Precious Lord, take my hand." And I cried, not from pain, from gratitude, the kind of crying that washes away the last pieces of the storm, the kind that comes when a soul finally finds its way home. Days later, I received a letter, not from the bank, not from the courts, but from someone God sent to remind me why it all happened. The letter arrived on a Saturday morning, its seal worn, the postmark from another state. The mailman smiled as he handed it over. "Smells like good news, Mrs. Alma." He had no idea how right he was. I opened it slowly, the yellowed paper creaking between my fingers. The handwriting was shaky, old. The signature, Ellen Parker, the former bank manager, the woman I never thought I'd hear from again. "Dear Alma, I heard you found the courage to act. I needed courage to write to you. I've always admired you, not only for standing against injustice, but for doing it without losing your faith. 20 years ago, when you opened that account with little Darius by your side, I remember what you said. I want to leave him a future, even if the present costs me dearly. Today, I see the future you left him wasn't money. It was an example, and that's why I'm writing, to tell you that women like us never walk alone. With love, Ellen." The letter trembled in my hands, and the wind through the window seemed to turn its pages with me. I smiled, eyes full of tears. I'd never imagined a simple thank you could weigh as much as a miracle. I closed my eyes, and for a moment saw it all again. The forged contract, the silent house, the night of rain, the no that saved my life. Every fragment of pain had become a step, and every step had brought me here, to a peace that wasn't the absence of problems, but the presence of God. In the days that followed, Loretta and I met in the church hall. I brought my journal. She brought her coffee. We taped a large sheet of paper to the wall, letters written by hand. "Never alone. Ministry for women of faith and dignity." 6 women came to the first meeting. Then 15. Each carried a story like mine. Hidden contracts, shouting grandchildren, husbands who disappeared, churches that judged. But when one woman spoke, the others listened. And that sound, that echo of empathy, was healing in motion. During the next Sunday service, the pastor called us to the front. "These women are building something new," he said. "Not a group of lament, but an altar of new beginnings." The applause was gentle, reverent, and as I held the microphone with trembling hands, I said what the Spirit whispered to me. "Pain taught me how to live for myself, but God taught me how to live for others without losing who I am. And if this story reaches a weary woman somewhere, let her know, never alone." The words came out as if they had been waiting their whole life to be spoken. The church choir answered with an amen that shook the floor. After the service, Kyla, my oldest granddaughter, waited for me by the door. She held an envelope. "Dad asked me to give this to you." I opened it carefully. Inside, a short note from Darius. "Mom, I started therapy. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want to learn what the Lord showed you. Responsibility. Thank you for being light, even when I was shadow. Darius." I sat on the church pew and cried, not for him, but with him. I cried for every mother who carries her children's guilt and forgets that salvation is also personal. I cried because God had kept his promise. He woke me before the fall. When I got home, the afternoon was already stretching across the horizon. I opened the windows, and sunlight slipped in slowly, painting everything in shades of honey and gold. The house breathed peace. I put on soft music, Mahalia, of course, and made tea for myself and my neighbor. On the table, I left a new note. "If I ever forget who I am, remind me I survived, and survival is only the beginning." I took my journal and wrote the final lines of this story. "My dignity is not negotiable. Proof is respect for the future. And faith is the language in which divine justice speaks." As the sun went down, light spread gently through the house. And there, between the scent of tea and the distant sound of church bells, I understood. The miracle wasn't getting back what was taken from me. It was getting back who I was. If this story found its way to you, it isn't by accident. Maybe God brought you here to remind you. Faith isn't the absence of pain. It's the thread that keeps you standing when everything pulls you down. If this story touched your heart, write "Never Alone" in the comments. This is your refuge, a space for women who have chosen dignity. Subscribe and share this video with someone who needs to remember. God never abandons the ones who choose to rise.